With all the question marks regarding the Boston Red Sox after the chaos over these last few days, we decided to bring on MassLive's Chris Cotillo to give us some answers on this episode of the Locked On Red Sox podcast.
You are Locked On Red Sox, your daily Boston Red Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I want to welcome you back into the Locked On Red Sox podcast, and thank you so much for making Locked On Red Sox your first listen of every single day. I'm your host, Jake Ignaszewski, and I hope everybody had a relaxing weekend despite all the chaos going on within Red Sox Nation. And there's still lots of question marks regarding this team going into the 2023 season, especially with now Xander Bogaerts officially a Padre. But we got to catch up with Red Sox beat reporter from MassLive, Chris Cotillo, who most recently had a lengthy conversation with Chaim Bloom, not only regarding the departure of Xander Bogaerts, but also what the rest of the offseason will look like for the Red Sox. And we brought on Chris in this episode of the Locked On Red Sox podcast to bring us some answers and a little bit more clarity on what the Red Sox will do for the remainder of this offseason. Now let's get into my conversation with Chris Cotillo. We are here with Red Sox beat writer for MassLive, or some of you might know him from his work with the Mexican Times, but Chris Cotillo. How we doing, Chris?
I'm good, man. How are you?
Doing good. Hanging in there, trying to stay positive. But take me through a little bit of these past few days and sort of what your reaction of not only what the team did earlier in the part of the winter meetings of, getting Kenley Jansen is as well as Yoshida, but, also the sort of what ended up happening with Xander Bogaerts.
Yeah, obviously, very busy Wednesday as we're leaving San Diego. The Bogaerts news broke right as our flight was taking off. So when that happens, obviously that turns a red eye where you're expecting to sleep the whole time into writing nonstop. As soon as we could put the trade tables down, that was just kind of nonstop writing. So that was a sleepless night, literally. I was one of those people that was saying, right up until Wednesday that I thought they were ultimately going to get it done with Bogaerts. I went on a Twitter space with some, guys every Red Sox fan knows, and Chris Henry, Craig Teed, some of those guys, and was saying the whole time, like, ultimately I've just always thought, and this was Wednesday night at like 8:00 Pacific. I was like, I just feel like these are these sides are meant to iron something out, and I think they're going to get it done. And ultimately, when you allow a guy to get to free agency and you allow to see him, if the grass is greener in other places, then you run the risk of some team, with no disrespect to Xander, some team getting stupid and offering $280 million over 11 years. So that's what happened. As I wrote, Red Sox screwed around in spring training with the offers, and they found out the other night when he left, and I could have wish if MassLive would have let me, would use more colorful language on it. But in terms of roster construction now, I did think that their entire offseason was kind of based around going and getting him, re-signing him, putting him there, and then seeing where the other pieces fell. Now I think the possibilities are more open. I don't think they're in scramble mode, because I do think they've considered these contingencies. We heard over the last week they talked to the Brewers about Colton Wong before he went to Seattle. That's just kind of proof that they're always exploring these types of things in case, that their top plan doesn't come to fruition. I really like the bullpen additions. I think this is going to be the best bullpen we've seen in the last 5-6 years. Jansen's obviously a stud. Chris Martin's a guy that throws strikes at a rate more than anybody else in baseball. Joely Rodriguez at that price, I think, is, a guy that, is your Matt Strahm replacement. Matt, it's kind of like, if you look at some of the expected numbers, Joely Rodriguez is going to give you probably what Matt Strahm was going to give you. He gets $2 million next year. Matt Strahm got 2 for $15 million, which is a crazy deal, I thought. So like that, there's just there's still a lot of work to be done. Obviously, I think they got to move past this Bogaerts thing here soon, start getting the business on some of the other guys, and I assume that'll start happening this week.
And you recently had a lengthy conversation with Chaim Bloom right after sort of all this Bogaerts stuff ended up ultimately happening. And what was sort of the energy like with Chaim Bloom specifically? Because, reports came out that he was like smiling. He was in a great mood Wednesday right after the Yoshida signing. But then obviously things definitely dimmed down a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, the way he put it to me is that they already knew Xander was going to be leaving, Tuesday into Wednesday. Julian McWilliams with the Globe wrote that story about, Chaim Bloom and kind of his demeanor at the airport and, how he looked. And, that was, I think, probably the finality of the whole situation hitting. The world knows now that we failed to sign Xander. There's going to be backlash. And, you're, as someone who was out there, those winter meetings days were very, very exhausting, right? Like I was dog tired by the end of every day, and the last day, the Kenley Jansen thing broke at 7 a.m. The Xander thing broke, 12 hours later, and Yoshida in the middle of the day and flights. And it's just, it wears you down those days. It's like with the time change, you're only there for 3 days, but then, everybody's out late and that's an excuse. But, everybody's exhausted anyway. And to have that kind of emotional thing happen, I'm sure it was hard for him. When we talked Friday night, it's not like he's, crushed by this, or I mean, I'm sure he's crushed in some ways. It's not like he's crushed to the point where he's not going to be able to do his job here in the next couple of weeks. It's just kind of, all right, let's get back to work and let's make this team, good. Obviously, there's an emotional attachment to Xander, and he was a great guy to cover from my perspective as someone who, I root for good guys to cover and good quotes and guys who are going to be accountable and guys I enjoy interviewing more than anything. I don't care about wins or losses, obviously, but that, for us, on the beat, it's tough to see him go for that perspective. The best player on the team being that accountable, that much of a leader, and being great with us. We could have asked for more from Xander, on the time I covered him and even the time before then for everybody else. I do think the one thing that Chaim wanted to reiterate to me, and that I think is true, of course, now they have to put their money where their mouth is. Okay. Just because Xander Bogaerts is gone doesn't mean they can't be a contending team in 2023. Does the path get harder? Sure. Mm-hmm. Is it going to be with less familiar faces? Sure. Are fans going to be happy if they let Xander walk and sign Dansby Swanson, and Dansby Swanson has a better year or something like that? Who's to say? People like familiarity. They like the guys that they've seen, grow up. And now that we've seen this happen time and time again, whether it be Lester or Mookie or Bogaerts, I think there's a kind of a systemic problem with the Red Sox and how they're locking up these guys. But the door is not closed, on a winning team. Obviously, a lot of the top free agents are off the market. The trade market hasn't moved at all. It would be very surprising to me if we didn't see the Red Sox make a pretty sizable trade with, either their prospects or a young major leaguer, whether that be Houck or Verdugo or somebody like that. I mean, there's still plenty of time. It's December 11th, and opening day is not until March 30th. The offseason doesn't end because Xander walks out the door, as painful as that is.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And I think a lot of the frustration, you brought up with the not re-signing homegrown talent, it happened with Lester, and you could also point to Betts' situation. He was ultimately traded, not signed through free agency. But Chaim essentially said, when talking about that, we haven't, as an organization, always found ways to come together in those situations. And I think it's time to really think and assess those situations. And we really saw what they did with the Whitlock situation, ended up trying to lock him up earlier in his career. But I think this sort of has to be a wake-up call, not only for the front office, but the ownership group, that they need to start prioritizing re-signing homegrown talent, kind of like we've seen the Braves do over these last few years as well.
Right. Well, all those guys are from Georgia, so they always have an upper hand because all their good players are always from their backyard. And as we've seen the last couple of weeks, geography is starting to matter, and True. They can give Rich Hill a big deal, but he's the only one from around here. I mean, yeah, they have to find ways to lock these guys up earlier. We've seen, like, not just the Braves do it, the Rays did it a lot. And when Chaim was there before, and the last few years, we really only see, I know Christian Vasquez got one a few years ago, and obviously then the sale and the Bogaerts extensions, but the last 3 or 4 years, only that Whitlock deal. I'd be surprised if they didn't try to get Bayo and Casas and, some of those guys done at some point in spring training, and just like, hey, you get the guy to do, like, 6 years, you buy out his free, all his ARB years, and then 2 or 3 options, extend that control. I mean, that's a good start. With Whitlock, obviously they got a couple extra years with the options. If they don't trade Houck, he's another candidate. Like, those are the types of deals that, you lock in cost certainty, and you see, like, the Braves can be aggressive because they have, like Acuna and Albies and all those guys took below market deals early, and now they don't have to pay them, and even in arbitration, like they've had to. So, obviously the main focus is Devers right now, but I think some of those younger guys as well. It comes down to, I think there is an element of they have not had the financial flexibility to do that in the last 2 years. When you're paying David Price $16 million to barely pitch for another team, and when you're paying, all these guys to be in different, the Matt Barnes deal is expensive. It's done after this year. And then, Obviously JD and Evaldi and Bogaerts and all those guys. Like, you don't have the financial flexibility to do a lot of these things, right? They were trying to get under the CBT. For some reason, they didn't get under it last year. Now they can be creative. They can kind of do whatever they want. Even almost more creative now that Bogaerts is gone, right? Like that 25 million, that 27 million they had earmarked for him. I know Chaim said they don't, wall off piles of money for different people, but realistically, right? Like they have now, that money is going to have to go somewhere else. And we'll see where that goes in the next few weeks or months.
I hope that you are enjoying my conversation with Chris, but I just want to take a second to talk to you about Bet Online, which is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from football to basketball to soccer and esports. We've got it all at betonline.net. And if you love sports podcasts, you can find those at BetOnline as well. We are always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix. Head over to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. Bet Online, where the game starts. And we also want to thank you so much for making Locked On Red Sox your first listen of every single day. Now make your second listen and check out Locked On Sports Today. From the games that matter the most to the biggest stories in sports, go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with local experts and insights only Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports Today. It's available on this app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. Now let's get back into my conversation with Chris Cotillo. I think the biggest question mark is who's really going to fill in for that shortstop position. The easy answer is Trevor Story, but then that leaves second base. And is Christian Arroyo an everyday second baseman? I don't think so. And CMerk5 on Twitter says, Swanson, somebody we could see them pursue. And how do you think that they view the shortstop position?
Yeah, I think it's definitely possible that they go after Swanson or Correa, as long as those guys are unsigned and as long as there's, those holes. I really think that it's a possibility, right? Like, I mean, they have the money; they're willing to give Xander, 160 million or whatever. I know Correa is going to be a lot more expensive than that, maybe even more expensive than what Xander got. But I mean, you can't rule it out, especially with the Correa-Cora connection. It seems to me like they might be in on those guys. Who's to say at this point if they'll be the most aggressive? If they're going to go internally, I think one thing that they could do when you talk about, creativity and options, and versatility and all that type of stuff, I think one option is you move Trevor Story to short, or you move Kike Hernandez to shortstop, which I don't think can be ruled out. I think between those guys, they think they're both capable of doing that. I can't really get a read on if they prioritize one over the other defensively. Kike is, I think we all think of him as this great defensive center fielder, but he really, was truly a utility guy who was able to play infield and primarily an infielder, primarily a shortstop before he got here. So I would not be surprised to see like Kike at short and Story at second, and then go out and get an outfielder, or vice versa. I think Christian Arroyo is a guy who's had really good moments. He's not proved to be the most dependable guy just based on injuries. And obviously that's something that sometimes is out of your control. My prediction, if I were to give one, and this is just an educated guess, would be they go out and they acquire like a star outfielder, whether it be Brian Reynolds or something like that. They move Kike to the infield and figure it out in the middle between Kike and Story, and those guys are both very good defensively. You're doing that. You're kind of a better defensive team probably, if you go out and I don't, think Reynolds is like a dynamic outfielder by any means, or I really don't know because no one pays attention to the Pirates, myself included. But, like go out and get one of those guys. I thought Nimmo would have been a pretty good fit. Obviously the Mets are just signing everybody. So, when they are offering that much money, you can't get that done. But I wouldn't be surprised if they went out and tried to get an outfielder. But I wouldn't be surprised if they tried Swanson or Correa. I mean, there's so many holes. There are big names that are going to be added to the roster. Kenley Jansen's not going to be the biggest new name on the Red Sox in 2023. They have the money to do it. They have the motivation to do it. Obviously there's still a lot of work to do, and I think they're going to do it.
And I think as well, it's nice that they at least have options with the versatility they have. It is a question mark if they're going to use Yoshida as, left fielder, as a DH with his defensive limitations. But, the Red Sox now have the money to play with, but one big question mark with some of these free agents is, would they want to sign somebody with a qualifying offer attached? And Tyler Milliken from one of your favorite Red Sox podcasts outside of from Fenway Rundown and Locked On, the name redacted, he said, could the QO compensation for Bogaerts and potentially Evaldi open them to signing somebody with a QO attached, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, there's different levels because the Red Sox are only getting, they're getting worse picks because they went over the CBT, which is now that's kind of manifested itself. It's even more ridiculous that they went and got Tommy Pham to put them over so they could finish 6 games under 500, and like you get a 4th round pick instead of a 2nd or whatever it is. All that stuff does factor in. I do think that Rob Bradford reported today, more likely than not, that if all these signs elsewhere, you get a free pick out of that. Their 4th round picks are not 1st round picks again. And we would have to give up more picks at the top, and these picks we're talking about in terms of 1st round or 4th round or whatever, but really it's just bonus pool money, because we know how the system is so complicated and works in different ways. Really it's bonus pool money there. So yeah, I mean, I guess theoretically, yeah, anytime you have more picks, you're probably more willing to deal with the pick that your pool increases, and that's more pool money theoretically you can give away. But there's still I know a few of those qualified free agents out there, and there's some guys that aren't, and there's obviously trade candidates too. I'm starting to think that kind of alluded to, if their biggest splash might come through trades. We haven't seen the trade market evolve that much, but at some point you got to push your chips in, and whether that's, I think they should trade Houck. I think they should. I think there's now the bullpen's what it is, and you could probably get a lot for that guy. Have him centerpiece of deal where you're not trading Bayo or Casas or Meyer or any of those guys. You can probably get something, and I think that that's probably something they're going to explore.
One team that we've seen be pretty active on the trade market and starting to offload some of these contracts is the Brewers. And you brought them up a little bit earlier. And I've heard some people bring up Willy Adames as a potential replacement at shortstop. And that's one of the most intriguing names and options that I've seen out there.
Obviously a Chaim connection from Tampa, right? So he was traded for old friend David Price back in the day. And yeah, I mean, those are all, look, anybody who's available, I think is somebody they're going to explore, right? Perfect fits, whether it be a shortstop right now who can slide right in there. Imperfect fits, like they were talking about with Colton Wong, all these types of guys. I think, Arizona has that outfield surplus of Varsho and Carroll, and, it'd probably take a haul to get those guys. But, why not try? The Red Sox, I think, the other thing that kind of lends some credence to what I was saying about the outfield a little bit is that, they have a lot of options in the infield, like in the next few years coming up, right? Like you can't obviously count on Meyer and York and Romero and all these top picks to be like, okay, we can just definitely pencil them in for 2025, whatever. But, you have Story for 5 more years. You have Arroyo under control. You have all these infield prospects coming up at various levels. And in the outfield, you don't really, Rafaela, I think profiles probably more as an outfielder. I know he's now a top guy, but Verdugo's only under control for 2 more years. Kike's only under control for 1 more year. I think the organization's probably largely out on Duran. I think he could be a trade candidate if a team likes his tools. Ref Snyder's a good player, but a bit player, right? So, like, if you go and get this controllable, like, outfielder who's, under your control for 3 or 4 years, I think that makes a lot of sense because there's just so many question marks in that area of the roster moving forward. I mean, your top outfield prospects probably Miguel Bleis, I think it's Bleis, and he's like 18 or 19, so a long ways away. So I think that's an area of the roster that, obviously when you have 3 homegrown guys and Mookie, Bradley, and Benintendi, and they all leave, and after a long run of success, then there's going to be some turnover there. That's just to a point now where I think they got to kind of shore that up. That's why I thought they'd actually go in on Judge, and they did to a point, but didn't materialize.
I think that controllable outfielder is Brian Reynolds. I think he fits the bill perfectly from what you're sort of describing. But you brought up the biggest question marks, with the homegrown talent, and now with Xander out the door, everybody's thinking, well, does that mean that Devers is going to do the same thing next year? And a lot of people just want the Devers now. And one thing that I've heard from you, and I've really tried to use this with my opinion on the Devers extension, is it's not going to happen immediately. It will most likely happen closer to spring training. And you've continued to say that, but when do you really think that the progress is really going to start to pick up for a potential Devers extension?
Yeah, it's just not a matter of like them not prioritizing him. It's just, like, I understand that they can walk and chew gum at the same time, but like if you are in the last few weeks like fully focused on your number one priority is Bogaerts, there's probably not a lot of human capital to spend on the Devers thing at that point. And if you were trying to sign all these relievers, and we've seen all these, coming close, the interest kings coming close, I think that's a little overblown because everybody offers everybody nowadays, and they're trying. Then it just naturally falls by the wayside, I think, a little bit. They got to construct if they're really interested in, let's say, hypothetically, if they're very interested in Dansby Swanson, and they're getting the sense that he's going to sign next week, all the recruiting Zoom calls and all the different things. Like, that's going to happen in the next week. You want all hands on deck, and like, so therefore Devers, who is not a free agent until after next year, is just going to get, pushed down the line. That's not an insult to him. That doesn't mean it's not a priority. It's just kind of the logistics of the whole thing. And spring training, once the roster's settled, I think it's a time to sit down with him and offer him a huge bag of money and see what he says. I wouldn't be surprised if he bet on himself and decided to go to free agency. I wouldn't be surprised if he took it. The Red Sox might be in a position now to overpay and, like, kind of go out and just say, all right, we're not letting this happen a third time, and go and sign him, whether it be 300 million, whether it be 330, whatever it is, and really just show that, financial might. But they don't need to do that now. Devers doesn't need to do it now. Nothing's going to change in his situation between now and February, now and March. And he's a guy that doesn't want to talk during the season. I think, if he doesn't sign in March, then you open yourself up to, well, if they're bad, he gets dealt at the deadline. If they're, if they're good, it doesn't, he's still going to hit free agency, right? So, like, I just think that it's just a thing that they still really want badly to do. Chaim said that yesterday or Friday when I talked to him. All these days are running together. But it's just, one of those things that they don't have to knock that out right now. If they did, people would be thrilled, but they're not going to be like, oh, well, we didn't sign Xander, so here we're going to do this reactionary move. All indications that I got where they're still far apart. Jeff Passan reported the same thing the other day. But that doesn't necessarily, it just comes to a point where Red Sox up their offer, Devers lowers his expectations, and a deal can come together. I was told Aaron Judge was not going to sign at the winter meeting. All of a sudden, the Yankees are offering 360, and yeah, of course, So those are how these things tend to work. And with them, there's no deadline until, obviously the end of next year.
And for a split second, we thought he was going to the Giants for a split second. But
no, that was Arson Judge's brother.
Exactly. I hope you are enjoying my conversation with Chris, but I just want to take a second to talk to you about Simply Safe. So at Locked On Red Sox, we believe home should be where you and your family feel safest, especially over the holidays. This season, give yourself and your family the gift of peace and protection with the #1 rated home security system, Simply Safe. And right now, Simply Safe is offering Locked On Red Sox listeners 40% off a new security system. But don't push this off, because for me, security, especially home security, is one of the most important things in my life, not only during the holidays, but just in regular life. I want to make sure that not only my items in my home, but also my home as a whole is safe. And one of the biggest things that I'm nervous about, especially during the holidays, is just package thieves. If I get a package and it's for a gift for a family member or even for myself, having somebody take it right off of my doorstep, or also just being able to feel safe during this holiday season. And with Simply Safe, especially in an emergency, they have 24/7 professional monitoring agents that use Fast Protect technology exclusively from Simply Safe to capture critical evidence and verify the threat is real, so you can get the higher priority police response. And Simply Safe also has a whole home security with advanced sensors for every room, window, and door. They have HD security cameras for inside and out. Also smarter ways to detect motion that alert you only when a threat is real, and even hazard sensors that detect fires, floods, and other threats to your home. Don't miss your chance to save big on your favorite security system. You can get 40% off any new system at simplysafe.com/lockedonmlb today. That's simplysafe.com/lockedonmlb. There's no safe like Simply Safe. Now let's get back into my conversation with Chris. But looking with Devers, I think that they really got to give him an offer that he can't refuse. And I'm curious to see if the years that Bogey got really opens Devers' eyes that maybe I can get 12 to 13 to 14 like Tatis did. Do you think that the Red Sox would be open to that, especially with him 26, 4 years younger than Bogey?
Yeah, I think whatever he gets is probably going to include an opt-out too, because all the players in that boat love having that flexibility. And you look at I think Heyman was tweeting that of Boris clients in the last few years, Bogaerts got the biggest jump, between what he was guaranteed the rest of the deal and opting out, which was, 60 million versus 280, right? Like, that's a big difference. It's tough to tell with the years. Just, Devers is younger, right? He's, going to be 3-4 years younger than Bogaerts was testing the market. I think then, we're seeing these crazy contracts for shortstops. So, they're different guys prioritize different things. Do you want the high AAV short deal? Do you want the longer deal? We were talking all year about Bogaerts getting 5-6 years. You get 11, so like, it's just, the different offers come in different forms. And, Chaim made a really good point the other day in one of the sessions in San Diego. He was talking to us about, different shortstops make different, in the last couple of years have done different things with the market. So like last year, right, Correa and Seager were the two top guys. Correa goes out and gets that 1 year deal effectively, right? 1 year, 40 million, whatever, hits free agency again. And then Seager gets, 10 for 325. And it's just like, well, different guys prioritize different things. They're similar players, they're similarly talented. They just, the markets develop in different ways. So, it's one of those things where, it comes down to what Rafi wants when they actually sit down at the table. And until that really happens fully, it's kind of hard. I do think the Red Sox would probably, prefer not to go 14 years. They've never really been a team to do that. But at a certain point, you got to kind of adjust to what the market says and, just get deals done.
Right. And, you brought up the multiple holes that this team has. And, one area that I'm curious to see where they go on is starting pitching, especially with all the guys that we've seen come off the market over these last few days. And, even some of the guys that they were really in on, Andrew Heaney, for example. But from most people that I talked to at the winter meetings, they mentioned that they mostly see the Red Sox going towards free agency to fill in the starting pitching. Where do you think that they're going to more be active to try and fill in that rotation? The free agency market or the trade market?
I think they're considering everything. The trade market really hasn't moved. The guy I always said they should go and give a Godfather offer for was Zach Gallen in Arizona. Not just because I went to college with him, but because he's a very, very good pitcher, obviously, and quietly he's become one of the absolute best in baseball. Apparently, Arizona said no. No surprise there. He's still got control left. So, I think that, there's obviously arms, whether it be Lopez in Miami or Shane Bieber. We'll see if either of those guys move. There's still a lot of options left on the open market, right? I mean, not just Eovaldi and Waka with the Red Sox guys, but you also have, Bassett, Rodon, those types of guys. And it didn't seem, early in the offseason, Alex Spear wrote, they're probably not going to be in the big four of Verlander, DeGrom, Bassett, and Rodon. But at that time, they probably were expecting sign Bogaerts and figure out the rotation elsewhere. So maybe they pivot there. It doesn't always have to be that straight pivot. If we want a Bogaerts now, let's go get another shortstop. It could be we can commit, now to a starter. I think they were involved in Senga before he went to the Mets. I think obviously Heaney, Eflin, some of these other guys. So there still are, names available. Obviously, I do also think they need that top line guy. They need probably a number 2 starter, someone in that mix. And all of a sudden, you have depth. Let's say, you don't know where you're going to get out of Sale or Paxton. Let's say one of those guys is good. And then you have, Whitlock, Bayo, Houck maybe in the mix, obviously Pivetta, and whoever you sign. And it's like, all right, you start to have some potential there. The Red Sox have had kind of a lack of sure things in their rotation for a little while here, a couple of years of all these an injury risk. Waka, I actually thought he was going to be horrible, and it completely proved me wrong last year. Obviously, Pivetta is as inconsistent as anybody. So, there's a lot of upside there, but still a lot of risk. Bayo's for first full season, he could be a Cy Young candidate, or he could need to go back to the minors. That's just how guys in their early 20s are. So, I think that they're still considering all their options there. Yes, that market has moved, especially at the high end, but the trade market, I'm trying to think of even who the biggest name to come off in the trade market so far has not been, anybody. Hunter Renfroe maybe for his annual trade. Yeah. But yeah, it's I think it's still a little bit early in that situation too. I didn't think they were going to go after Verlander or DeGrom. Those were two risky moves for very electric, talented arms. But that's I never thought the Red Sox would be playing in that market.
Yeah, I completely agree. And one last thing that I got for you, one sort of narrative, I guess, that's been going around since the Bogaerts departures, Chaim might be in over his head. And, especially from the Julian McWilliams report of, him, staring into space, seeming a little bit overwhelmed. You've not only got to talk to him in multiple times throughout his tenure here, but also at the winter meetings and over the last few days. just from the sense from the outside, at least from, not only your quotes from inside your article, but also quotes from at the winter meetings, he seems a little bit more open than he usually has been, saying that the Red Sox want to get 6, 7, 8, 9 guys. He's majority of the time he says a lot of different things, meaning absolutely nothing, and usually seems very secretive about the way that he wants to go forward. But he seems a little bit more open in the last few months or so. But I'm curious from what you have noticed from Chaim Bloom. Does he seem to be getting a little bit more comfortable, or is the narrative correct on that he might be a little bit in over his head?
No, I think that he's just a guy who's very principled, and like it just comes down to, are those principles the right fit for this market? Like it's tough because I think he's a very smart guy, very personable. I think he's a very some of the stuff behind the scenes, like a hilarious, like sarcastic, dry humor, normal guy. I think there's always like that. You hear about all these things and talk radio, and it's like all these nerds that don't come out of the room, and they're stat guys, and it's kind of like a normal guy. And he's trying to do his best. He doesn't want them to lose, but there is a point where, he has taken the things that have made the Rays successful and he has applied them, like really scouting, going after a Rule 5 pick like Whitlock, going after a guy on waivers like Arroyo or Schreiber, finding those guys in the margins, which I think he's done a pretty good job on. Even like trading Workman and Hembry, change of scenery guy for Pivetta. As I said, Pivetta's inconsistent, but he's given you now 2 years as a rotation piece. You didn't know you're going to get that. Obviously Seabold reached the majors too, but there are times that it seemed like he has not been able to be as aggressive or be as willing to spend as you need to be in the Red Sox big front office chair. So like should they have given more to Bogaerts early on in those negotiations? For sure. I don't blame. Should they have gotten more from Mookie? It was like that Verdugo, Wong, and Downs package now looks pretty bad. A couple of years later, that's an area. The Renfroe Jackie trade was not good. I just feel like when you talk about him being more open the last couple of weeks, I think so too, and I think it's because I think he can see and he can read and he understands the fan frustrations that things are going. And he wants to be clear, like, this is kind of our plan, bear with us. It's not going to all come together in a week, and like, the one thing that always stuck out to me the last couple of weeks is they said, we need to be better with the bullpen. The bullpen has not been good the last couple of years. We've neglected that. We need to go out. We got to do this. We got to do it right. And they could, their bullpen's going to cost more than $40 million next year, and like, that's not something we've seen recently. They've been bailed out by guys coming out of nowhere like Workman and Schreiber instead of just having your locked. I wrote yesterday or the day before, Kenley Jansen is the replacement for Craig Kimbrell 4 years too late. So like, he said on my thing the other day, I don't care how much shit I get, as long as we're winning, that's the goal. And I thought that was kind of like, people seem to like that quote, like, all right, I'll back it up, and they need to,
Right.
I do think a little difference from this offseason is from before. And I tweeted out that geography was winning the winter meetings, and people took as like a homer take the other day. But in previous years, the Red Sox were not making big offers this time of year. They were waiting for the market to come to them in January. And they did that time and time again. Like, you remember that run in 2019, 2020, where they signed Kike and Richards and traded for Ottavino and signed Marwin and all these Martin Perez, Martin, all those guys, like that happened in January once those guys came to their prices, right? This year, they are actually, like they're offering guys early, and they've just gotten beat out. Heaney took way less money to pitch closer to home. Eflin took the same amount of money to pitch, close to home. Like, they just, Canely, it was a difference of a couple $100,000. Like, there's just, they really tried, and they've just, for whatever reason, gotten beaten out. In some cases, and then in other cases, right? Like, they offered Chris Martin probably a lot more than other teams are willing to go. They offered Kenley Jansen $16 million a year. So like, I do think there is signs that they are being more aggressive than they have been in the past, and whether that manifests itself in a big move in the next couple of weeks, that remains to be seen.
I think especially if with the Kenley signing and the Yoshida signing, if both of those happened right after Bogaerts, it would be a completely different sort of narrative or tone from Red Sox fans, because it kind of got like lost in the dust. So most Red Sox fans forgot that the Red Sox spent almost $20 million on a closer. And that was one thing when I saw that notification, I thought it was Danny Jansen. No joke. I didn't expect the Red Sox to throw 17 or 16 million for a closer, but that's what, it's nice to see him being a little bit more aggressive. That's one thing that I feel like we haven't seen too much from Chaim Bloom. He wants to make sure that he gets at least everything right to a point, but it seems like, at least in my mind, he seems to be getting a little bit more comfortable and starting to, I guess, feel a little bit like he needs to make things happen to bring a winning product for the team.
And I think he also knows that the heat is on, right? If they have another losing season, it's not hard to envision us talking about the hot seat with him, so which is probably a longer conversation for another day, but we are at that point.
Yeah, completely agree. Always appreciate the insight, Chris. And for anybody who wants to check out your articles, always give great insight about everything that's going on around the Sox. Where can they find that stuff?
It's all on MassLive on Twitter at Chris Cotillo, not Cotillo, and at the Fenway Rundown podcast.
Everybody go and check it out. Not only does he do great stuff in his articles, but also on the Fenway Rundown has some great conversations, some great insight about everything that's going on about the Boston Red Sox. Go over and check it out. Thanks so much as always, Chris. Really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, man. Appreciate it.
I hope you did enjoy my conversation with Chris Cotillo and got a little bit more insight on what the Red Sox could do throughout the rest of this offseason to fill in the multiple holes that they have on their depth chart, not only within the shortstop at second base position, outfield, and also starting pitching. But we're going to continue to keep you posted about everything that is going on surrounding the Boston Red Sox. And we have a very exciting episode tomorrow planned with Julian McWilliams from the Boston Globe, who was actually in the airport and at the specific gate that the Red Sox front office was at when they found out that Xander Bogaerts had officially signed with the San Diego Padres. But we're not only going to talk to him about that, but much more topics surrounding the team. And if you want to stay updated about what's going on, not only with this podcast, but with the Red Sox in general, you can go over and follow us over at Locked On Red Sox on Twitter. It's LO_Red Sox. You can also follow myself on Twitter. It's at Jake Iggy. And also my co-host, Lauren. It's three laws, Lauren with 4 R's. But as always, we greatly appreciate everybody making Locked On Red Sox their first listen of every single day. Now make your second listen Locked On Sports Today. From the games that matter to the most to the biggest stories in sports, go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with local experts and insights only Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports Today is available on this app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. But as always, we greatly appreciate everybody tuning into Locked On Red Sox podcast. We hope everybody has a great rest of their day. We'll end it how we always end it. Let's go Sox. Peace.